Jake Turner hunched over his desk in the junior ROTC classroom at Norfolk High, staring at the floor as the laughter bounced off the walls. He could feel the eyes of his classmates burning into him, their whispers sharp as knives. It had started innocently enough. A casual remark, just a passing mention. My mom's an admiral in the Navy. But from that moment on, Jake's life had become a relentless cycle of mockery. His peers weren't subtle about it. The teasing was loud, pervasive, and cruel. Some called him a liar. Others joked that he was living in a fantasy. Even Commander Harris, the strict ROTC officer with decades of service under his belt, smirked with a disbelief that stung more than any schoolyard taunt. Jake's hands shook slightly as he clenched the edge of his desk. The other cadets leaned forward, grinning. "Oh, come on, Turner," said one of his classmates, a tall, wiry boy named Dylan. "Does your imaginary mom fly a warship too? Or just polish metals in your dreams?" Laughter erupted across the room. Jake felt the familiar flush of heat creep up his neck. He kept his eyes down, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. He had learned early that arguing only made it worse. Words in this room were weapons, and he was unarmed. Commander Harris, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, chuckled softly, shaking his head. "An Admiral mom, huh?" he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. "That's rich, Turner. Really rich. You know, in my 30 years, I've never met a cadet with a family legend like that. Must be proud." The laughter from the cadets intensified. Jake could feel his chest tighten, his palms sweating as he gripped the edge of his desk. He wanted to disappear. He wanted the floor to swallow him whole. But he didn't, because deep down, he knew the truth. His mother, Admiral Rebecca Turner, was real. More than real. She was one of the most respected officers in the Navy, a trailblazer who had earned every star and ribbon on her uniform. She had commanded fleets, led missions that were classified at the highest levels, and inspired sailors across the country. To Jake, she was simply Mom, but to the Navy, she was history in motion, a symbol of strength and leadership. The bell rang, but the teasing didn't stop. Dylan leaned over, smirking. "Hey, Turner, maybe your mom can help you with that weak salute of yours. Or is she busy commanding the whole Atlantic Fleet?" The others snickered. Jake's face burned hotter than ever. He opened his mouth to respond, but stopped. What could he say that wouldn't sound like bragging? What could he say that wouldn't make him seem like he was still living in a dream world? Silence was safer, at least for now. After class, Jake dragged himself down the hall toward the ROTC locker room. The laughter and whispers followed him like shadows, sticking to his skin, refusing to let go. He reached his locker and slammed it shut harder than necessary, the echo reverberating down the empty hallway. He pressed his forehead against the cool metal, trying to steady his racing heart. Why can't they just leave it alone? He thought. Why does it matter so much that they don't believe me? Jake remembered the night before, sitting on the couch in his small apartment with his mom. She had caught him staring at the medals displayed neatly in a glass case on the wall, medals he had only ever seen up close a few times. "They'll never believe me," he had muttered, a lump in his throat. She had smiled, sitting beside him and placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Jake," she had said gently, "strength isn't about making others believe you. It's about knowing the truth and standing tall anyway. They'll see it eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but your actions, your discipline, your courage, they'll see it. And that will be enough." Her words had rung true, yet in the hallway of his high school, they felt far away, almost unreachable. He tried to take a deep breath, but it felt like trying to inhale through a straw. The teasing wasn't just words. It was a weight pressing on him, a shadow he couldn't shake. Still, he reminded himself. She had promised. She would come for inspection day, and when she did, everything would change. He had to survive until then. Jake's mind wandered back to the first time he had realized just how impressive his mother truly was. He had been 8 years old, staring out at the Atlantic from the deck of a Navy destroyer. She had allowed him a rare glimpse of her command, letting him watch sailors move with precision, the ship responding to her orders as if it were an extension of her own body. He remembered her voice, calm but firm, cutting through the roar of the waves. Every order has a purpose, Jake. Every movement matters. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. Even at that age, he had understood that respect and discipline were intertwined, like two halves of the same coin. The memory brought a faint smile to his face, but it quickly faded as he remembered the laughter of his classmates. Why can't they see it? He thought again. Why do they care more about mocking me than learning anything real? He adjusted his uniform, straightening the collar and smoothing the creases in his shirt. He refused to let them see him break. If they wanted to mock him, they would have to do it with him standing tall, not cowering in shame. As the morning moved forward, Jake's humiliation continued. Harris seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out his mistakes, exaggerating them for all the cadets to see. "Turner, your salute is sloppy again," he barked during drill practice. "Perhaps your Admiral mother should come down here and demonstrate how it's done." The cadets laughed again, and Jake clenched his teeth, his pride chafing like fire under his skin. Every fiber of him wanted to scream, to shout that she was real, that she wasn't a fantasy, that he wasn't lying. But he didn't. He had learned that patience and timing mattered more than angry words. During lunch, Jake found a quiet corner, opening his notebook to doodle absent-mindedly. His pen traced small ships, waves, and metals. Each stroke reminded him of her, each line a silent connection to the mother who was both his hero and his protector. He could almost hear her voice over the cafeteria noise. "You don't need to prove yourself to anyone. The truth will speak for itself." Still, the teasing gnawed at him. He wondered if she really would come to inspection day. Her schedule was demanding, filled with classified missions and sudden orders. She had promised, but promises from the Navy often meant under duty. His stomach knotted at the thought of showing up to the classroom alone, mocked and humiliated once again. He swallowed hard, trying to push down the fear. By the end of the day, Jake was exhausted, mentally and emotionally. The laughter had followed him down every hallway, echoing in every corner of his mind. But as he walked home through the late afternoon sun, he reminded himself of one simple truth. She was real, and she would come. He didn't need validation from anyone else, not yet. He only needed to survive until inspection day. That evening, he carefully polished his boots, straightened his uniform, and rehearsed his salutes in the mirror, imagining his mother standing at attention. He knew the moment she arrived, everything would change. The taunts, the ridicule, the whispers, they would all stop. And until then, he would endure, standing tall, carrying the pride of a family whose strength was forged in service, courage, and unwavering truth. Jake took a final deep breath, looking at his reflection. The face staring back at him wasn't the boy mocked by his classmates. It was a cadet, a son of an admiral, a boy who had witnessed courage and leadership firsthand, and someone who refused to let disbelief define him. He straightened his shoulders, clenched his fists, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, they'll see. They'll all see." The next morning, Jake awoke before his alarm, heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The events of yesterday, the teasing, the whispers, the relentless laughter, still clung to him like a shadow. He had barely slept, replaying every word, every smirk, every sarcastic remark. Yet underneath the tension, there was a spark of hope. Tomorrow's inspection day. She promised she'd come. That thought was his lifeline, a tether holding him to courage and determination. He dressed meticulously, smoothing the creases of his uniform, adjusting his tie, and shining his boots until they reflected the ceiling lights like polished mirrors. Every detail mattered. He knew Harris would scrutinize him, mock him, and test his patience. And yet, for the first time in weeks, Jake felt a strange sense of empowerment. He wasn't pretending. He wasn't lying. He was preparing, not just for the inspection, but for the moment when the truth would finally be undeniable. Breakfast was a quiet affair. His mother had left early for an early morning briefing at the naval base, leaving Jake to make his way to school alone. The apartment was eerily silent, the hum of the refrigerator the only background noise. He grabbed his bag, double-checked his uniform, and paused at the door. In his mind, he could hear her voice again, steady and calm. Discipline isn't just about appearances, Jake. It's about integrity. He exhaled, squared his shoulders, and stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The walk to school was a series of micro-battles. Whispers trailed him down the street, and even strangers at the corner of the block seemed to glance a second too long. He ignored them, focusing instead on the rhythm of his own steps, the clack of polished shoes on concrete. Every stride was a silent affirmation. He was a cadet, and he would not break under mockery. He had learned to carry his pride quietly, like armor, invisible yet strong. As he entered the ROTC building, a familiar scent of polish, metal, and leather greeted him. The classroom was already buzzing with cadets preparing for the day. Harris was pacing near the front, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. The commander spotted Jake and raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Turner," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "Ready to embarrass yourself again?" Laughter rippled through the room. Jake simply nodded, keeping his gaze forward. Silence, not words, would speak louder today. During morning drills, the teasing escalated. Dylan, Jake's relentless classmate, made a show of stumbling behind him, exaggerating every movement. "Careful, Turner," he called. "Wouldn't want to disappoint your famous Admiral." The other cadets chuckled, and Jake's jaw tightened. He had learned not to react outwardly. Any hint of anger would only fuel the ridicule. Instead, he focused on his form, every salute, every turn, and every stance executed with meticulous precision. The irony was not lost on him, while they mocked his mother's accomplishments. He was silently practicing excellence, the very lesson she had instilled in him. By mid-morning, the room had reached a tense equilibrium. Harris continued to hover, scrutinizing cadets for minor errors, his amusement thinly veiled. He stopped in front of Jake, tapping his clipboard. "Careful, Turner. Don't make me laugh. Your Admiral mother might disown you if you mess this up." The cadets laughed, some nudging each other in mock solidarity. Jake swallowed hard, feeling the familiar sting of humiliation. But beneath it, a quiet fire burned. She's real. She'll be here. And then it will all change. During a short break, Jake ducked into a corner, retrieving his notebook from his backpack. He flipped it open to the sketches of naval ships, medals, and insignias he had drawn the night before. His pen traced the lines of a destroyer in action, the metal plating and deck equipment rendered with careful attention. Each stroke was a meditation, a connection to his mother, a reminder that she existed beyond mockery, beyond disbelief. He paused to glance at the pages of his journal, reading the notes she had written for him during one of her rare visits. Courage isn't absence of fear. It's acting despite it. The bell for assembly rang, and the cadets lined up in neat rows. Harris's eyes scanned the room, calculating, critical, his arrogance palpable. "Today's inspection will be a test," he barked, voice carrying across the room. "Discipline, precision, attention to detail fail, and you fail publicly. Jake's stomach twisted. He had endured mockery for weeks, but now the stakes felt higher. This inspection wasn't just about uniforms or salutes. It was about survival, about proving that he could maintain composure under relentless pressure. Jake's mind drifted to a memory from his childhood, the first time he had seen his mother in full uniform, standing on the deck of a warship as sailors snapped to attention. He remembered her commanding presence, the way every officer and sailor responded to her voice without question. Even at 8 years old, he had understood that leadership was not about demanding respect. It was about earning it through integrity and action. Today, he would carry that lesson with him, even if his peers still mocked him. The inspection began. Harris moved with calculated authority, stopping to scrutinize each cadet. He barked at misaligned collars, uneven boots, and sloppy salutes. Jake stood at attention, his movements precise, his expression neutral. Dylan made a show of misstepping behind him, smirking over his shoulder, but Jake ignored it. Each movement was deliberate, a silent testament to his training, his discipline, and his quiet pride. She see it. She'll see that I didn't need her presence to be strong. By late morning, the tension in the room was nearly unbearable. Cadets whispered among themselves, glancing at Jake with curiosity mixed with lingering disbelief. Harris seemed frustrated, unable to find a single flaw significant enough to mock Jake further. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt a glimmer of vindication, though he didn't dare show it. He focused on every step, every command, every turn, his mind a careful balance of control and anticipation. Finally, as the inspection neared its end, Jake's heart raced with anticipation. He glanced at the clock, noting the minutes ticking down. His mother had promised she would be there, and he could almost feel her presence, a steadying force at the edge of his mind. Every laugh, every snide comment, every harsh word from Harris had sharpened his focus, honed his patience. He was ready, not for mockery, but for the moment when the truth would emerge, undeniable and undeniable. As the last cadet saluted Harris, Jake's mind wandered to what would happen next. What would it feel like when she finally walked through the door, commanding attention without effort, every eye drawn to her presence? How would Harris react, stripped of his arrogance, confronted with the undeniable truth of her authority and rank? Jake clenched his fists, taking a deep, steadying breath. Soon, the ridicule would end. Soon, the proof of his mother's existence and his own resilience would be undeniable. In that moment, Jake Turner stood taller than ever before, his nerves tempered by anticipation and quiet determination. He wasn't just enduring the teasing anymore. He was preparing, every heartbeat a step closer to vindication, every breath a testament to his patience. Tomorrow, the truth would finally emerge, and everything would change. And as he adjusted his uniform one last time, he whispered to himself, just as his mother had taught him, strength isn't in proving others wrong. It's in standing tall, knowing who you are. Inspection week had a weight that seemed to press down on Jake Turner from the moment he woke each morning. Every hallway at Norfolk High seemed longer, every glance from a classmate heavier, every echo of laughter more pointed than before. The teasing had grown sharper, now fueled not just by disbelief, but by anticipation. His peers were waiting for a moment of failure, for the chance to prove that Jake's Admiral nom was nothing more than a figment of his imagination. Even Commander Harris, with his decades of naval discipline, seemed determined to break him, using ridicule as a weapon. Jake had learned to endure, but the constant pressure gnawed at him relentlessly. Each drill, each salute, each row of cadets marching in formation was a reminder of the scrutiny he lived under. Harris prowled the room like a hawk, stopping occasionally to point out minor flaws, his voice sharp and cruel. Turner, eyes forward. Posture straight. Remember your Admiral mother might be watching. Laughter rippled across the room, and Jake's jaw tightened. He had to maintain his composure. Any outward sign of frustration would be interpreted as weakness, proof that the teasing had an effect. The irony was not lost on him. While his classmates mocked his mother, he was silently emulating her principles: precision, discipline, and unshakable calm. Each movement he made, every careful salute, was a reflection of the lessons she had instilled in him from a young age. Memories of standing on the deck of her ship as a child replayed in his mind, the way sailors snapped to attention at her command, the precision of every movement under her watchful eyes, the quiet authority she carried without demanding it. He drew strength from those memories, letting them anchor him in the face of relentless teasing. During a short break in the drills, Dylan sidled up to Jake, smirking. "Hey, Turner, maybe your mom can come down here and fix your salute for you," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. The laughter that followed was almost deafening. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His instinct was to lash out, to shout that she was real, that she commanded real fleets, that she had achieved every rank with effort and courage. But he didn't. He had learned long ago that words without control were weapons that could backfire. Instead, he focused on controlling his breathing, letting calm radiate from him like armor. He ducked into a quiet corner of the locker room, pulling out his notebook. Inside were sketches of naval ships, diagrams of uniforms, and meticulous notes on protocol, his private connection to the mother who had taught him the importance of preparation. He traced the lines of a destroyer on the page, imagining it slicing through waves, every order executed with flawless precision. This notebook was more than drawings. It was a map to confidence, a silent declaration that he wasn't just making up stories. Every pen stroke reminded him of her reality, her achievements, and the promise that she would attend the inspection. As the day progressed, Jake could feel the pressure mounting. Harris seemed more determined than ever to catch him off guard, barking orders with exaggerated sharpness, scrutinizing every cadet with eagle eyes. Discipline. Attention to detail. If you can't meet standards, you have no business in this room. The commander's voice echoed across the classroom, each word like a hammer striking Jake's resolve. He felt the eyes of his peers following him, anticipating his mistakes, ready to mock. And yet he stood straight, every movement deliberate, every step measured. He refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him falter. The anticipation of his mother's arrival hung over him like a storm cloud. He imagined her walking into the classroom, tall and composed, uniform pristine, medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He imagined the reaction, the sudden silence, the gasps, the disbelief washing over every cadet, and especially over Harris. The thought gave him courage. If he could endure the taunts and maintain his discipline until that moment, he knew the ridicule would finally end. Every misstep, every sarcastic comment from his classmates only sharpened his focus, preparing him for the day when the truth would finally be undeniable. During drill practice, the tension reached a near breaking point. Harris circled the room, his eyes locking on Jake more frequently than on any other cadet. Each misaligned collar, each minor deviation in posture, was exaggerated with a snicker or sarcastic remark. Turner, eyes forward. If your mother were here, she'd be. Well, she'd be disappointed. The cadets laughed again, and Jake's face burned with a mixture of shame and anger. He wanted to shout, to defend himself, to announce the truth. But he didn't. He remained silent, moving with deliberate precision, his mind focused entirely on surviving until she appeared. Jake's thoughts drifted back to the words his mother had once spoken to him in the quiet of their apartment, late at night after a long day. Strength isn't about proving yourself to others, Jake. It's about knowing who you are and acting accordingly. Respect is earned through action, not words. He had repeated those words to himself countless times over the past week, like a mantra. They grounded him, reminding him that mockery could not define his reality. As the morning turned into afternoon, Jake felt the weight of exhaustion settling in, but he refused to yield. Every muscle, every nerve, every thought was focused on maintaining composure and precision. He had rehearsed every movement in his mind, every step and salute, and now he executed them flawlessly, silently demonstrating the discipline that had been drilled into him from years of observation and practice. Finally, the moment approached when inspection day would reveal the ultimate truth. Jake's stomach twisted with anticipation, a mixture of fear and hope. He could almost feel her presence, a steadying force that had always guided him. Every joke, every snide remark, every glance of disbelief from his classmates had sharpened him, prepared him for this day. The ridicule, which had once seemed unbearable, now felt like a test he was ready to pass. He straightened his back, adjusted his collar, and exhaled slowly. For the first time in weeks, he felt a measure of control, a quiet confidence that came not from proving others wrong, but from knowing the truth and standing firmly in it. She's real. She be here. And then they'll see. The thought steadied his shaking hands and focused his mind. Every taunt had sharpened him. Every mocking glance had prepared him for this moment. He would endure, and when the truth appeared in the form of Admiral Rebecca Turner, nothing would be left to question. As the final period of the day drew near, Jake's nerves were taut like the strings of a violin. The classroom buzzed with whispers and anticipation. He could feel the energy of the room shifting, the cadets sensing that something significant was about to happen. Harris continued to prowl, his sarcasm faltering, as if he sensed the inevitability of the approaching moment. And Jake, standing quietly at his station, felt a calm determination settle over him. He would not falter. He would endure. He would prove that truth, discipline, and courage were far more powerful than ridicule. By the time the final bell rang, Jake was exhausted but resolute. He had survived the relentless teasing, maintained his composure under the harshest scrutiny, and honed his focus to a razor edge. All that remained was the moment when his mother would arrive, when the ridicule would end, and when the truth of Admiral Rebecca Turner's existence and his own resilience would finally become undeniable. He straightened his uniform one last time, took a deep breath, and whispered under his breath, "Tomorrow they will see. They will all see." The morning of inspection day arrived with a crisp chill in the Norfolk air. Sunlight filtered through the classroom windows, catching the polished brass buttons and shining boots of the cadets as they lined up in formation. Every movement, every breath was charged with tension. Jake Turner stood rigid at attention, his chest tight with anticipation. Weeks of teasing, ridicule, and doubt had culminated in this day. Every glance from his classmates felt heavy, loaded with disbelief. Harris prowled like a predator, his eyes sharp, searching for any hint of weakness. "Attention!" Harris barked, his voice slicing through the quiet. Cadets snapped to attention, faces tense. Jake's heart pounded in rhythm with the metallic click of boots on the floor. He had rehearsed this moment endlessly in his mind. The precision, the posture, the salutes, every action a reflection of the discipline instilled by years of ROTC drills and lessons from his mother. And yet, beneath the rehearsed exterior, nerves churned like storm-tossed waves. Dylan, ever eager to humiliate him, smirked from the row behind, nudging a friend and whispering just loud enough for Jake to hear, "Bet your Admiral Mom wouldn't even recognize you in this mess." Laughter erupted. Jake forced his jaw tight, willing himself not to react. Every fiber of him wanted to shout that she was real, that she commanded real fleets, that she had earned every star on her uniform. But he didn't. He held his composure, each movement deliberate, each turn and salute precise. The inspection began in earnest. Harris moved down the line like a hawk, scrutinizing every cadet. He lingered on Jake, exaggerating every minor misalignment, every flaw, as if to highlight his failures. Turner, shoulders squared, eyes forward. Imagine your Admiral mother is watching, and imagine her disappointment. The cadet snickered. Jake's face burned with a mix of shame and anger. Yet beneath it all, a fire burned quietly. She's coming. She promised. She be here, and then they'll see. He focused on the rhythm of his breathing, the precision of his posture, grounding himself in every movement. Every step Jake took, every crisp salute, was an invisible conversation with his mother. He imagined her standing at attention, the medals on her uniform gleaming, the gold stars reflecting authority and experience. He remembered standing on the deck of her ship as a child, the sailors snapping to attention at her command, and the calm power she wielded effortlessly. That memory, vivid and grounding, was a shield against the teasing, a reminder that mockery could not define reality. By mid-morning, the classroom buzzed with whispered anticipation. Cadets were increasingly aware of the unusual tension surrounding Jake. Even Harris's smirk faltered occasionally, as if he sensed the inevitable change in the room. Jake remained steadfast, aware that the moment he had been waiting for was approaching. Every taunt and every sarcastic comment over the past weeks had honed his focus, preparing him for the arrival of someone who could instantly shift the balance of power, his mother. Then, a faint sound reached Jake's ears, a soft click of polished shoes on the floor, distinct yet commanding. He froze, heart racing. The chatter in the room dulled as cadets instinctively turned toward the entrance. The door swung open slowly, and sunlight spilled across the classroom. A tall figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, her posture impeccable, her uniform immaculate. Every eye in the room instinctively snapped to attention. Even Harris's mouth fell open, speechless, as if the world had tilted on its axis. Admiral Rebecca Turner stepped inside with the calm authority of someone accustomed to commanding entire fleets. Her medals gleamed in the light, ribbons perfectly aligned, gold stars shining with unmistakable authority. The room fell silent, the murmurs of cadets hushed as if a spell had been cast. Jake's chest swelled with pride and relief. She was real. More than real, she was formidable, a living embodiment of the truth he had carried quietly for weeks. Harris, pale and flustered, struggled to find words. "Admiral Turner?" he stammered, his voice betraying disbelief. Every ounce of arrogance that had fueled his mocking tone evaporated instantly. The commanding presence of Admiral Turner was overwhelming, stripping the room of its previous levity. Cadets shifted nervously, unsure where to direct their gaze, while Jake's own eyes shone with a mixture of awe and gratitude. The Admiral's gaze swept across the room, sharp and assessing, then softened ever so slightly when it landed on Jake. "At ease," she commanded, her voice crisp, carrying both authority and calm reassurance. Every cadet froze for a heartbeat, then relaxed under her presence. Her eyes met Harris's, steady and unwavering, and a subtle tension settled over the room. "I came to see how my cadet is doing," she said, her words precise but infused with warmth. A quiet acknowledgement that Jake was more than his classmates' mockery. For the first time in weeks, Jake allowed himself to exhale. He stood taller, chest swelling with pride, as the room seemed to shift under the weight of his mother's presence. Cadets who had laughed at him now whispered, some in awe, others in embarrassment, all silently reassessing everything they thought they knew. Harris, the man who had mocked him relentlessly, now seemed diminished, his authority undercut by the undeniable reality of the Admiral's presence. Admiral Turner moved through the rows, her gaze sharp yet encouraging. Cadets instinctively straightened, trying to anticipate her expectations. She paused briefly at each station, offering concise feedback, her voice measured but inspiring. When she reached Jake, she lingered, her expression softening slightly. "Good work, Cadet Turner," she said quietly, her hand brushing his shoulder ever so lightly. "Keep pushing yourself. Discipline, precision, pride. Never forget why you do what you do." Jake's heart swelled. These weren't just words of encouragement. They were validation, a seal of truth and pride that silenced every lingering doubt. The classroom remained tense, the cadets absorbing the magnitude of the moment. Whispers circulated, so he wasn't lying. "She's real." Harris, pale and silent, finally croaked. She's real?" The Admiral's gaze fixed on him, steady and unflinching. "Yes, Commander. I am his mother. And I am very real." A quiet chuckle came from the captain overseeing the program, shaking his head in disbelief. "Well, she's real, all right," he said. Harris swallowed hard, his earlier smirk gone, replaced by a reluctant acknowledgement of reality. For Jake, the humiliation that had haunted him for weeks evaporated in an instant. Every whispered joke, every mocking glance, every sneer from his classmates now seemed insignificant. The proof had arrived in the form of his mother's presence, her authority undeniable, her accomplishments visible in every movement and every word. The boy who had endured weeks of ridicule now stood tall, validated not by argument, but by the living truth of his mother's existence. Admiral Turner continued her inspection, offering sharp but fair critiques to each cadet. The students who had once mocked Jake now tried to impress her, straightening collars, aligning boots, practicing their salutes. Harris followed silently, his ego stripped bare, forced to acknowledge the undeniable authority of a woman who had spent her life commanding respect. Jake's eyes met his mother's briefly, and she gave a faint nod. It wasn't just approval, it was recognition. He had endured. He had maintained discipline. He had proven himself through patience and precision, and she had seen it. As the inspection drew to a close, the atmosphere remained charged but transformed. Cadets whispered, exchanging looks of awe and respect. Jake felt a deep sense of accomplishment, but it wasn't just personal victory. He had witnessed the power of truth, of discipline, and of integrity standing against mockery and disbelief. His classmates now had to reconcile their assumptions with reality, and Harris himself could do nothing but silently acknowledge that he had misjudged the boy he had mocked. When the Admiral departed, the room remained quiet, cadets reflecting on the shift that had just occurred. Jake felt the pride swell within him, not for vindication, but for enduring, for standing tall, for embodying the lessons his mother had taught him. Respect, he realized, was earned, not demanded. And today, through patience, discipline, and courage, he had earned it. As he straightened his uniform one final time, Jake exhaled, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. His mother's presence had not only proven the truth, but also reminded him of the values that mattered most: integrity, perseverance, and quiet strength. The boy who had been mocked, teased, and doubted now stood tall, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Tomorrow, he thought, I will carry this pride with me. Today, they saw the truth, and they cannot take it away. The classroom still vibrated with the energy of disbelief as Admiral Rebecca Turner walked among the cadets, her steps measured, each movement radiating authority. The hum of whispered conversations slowly died down as students instinctively straightened, trying to anticipate her expectations. Her gaze was sharp, meticulous, scanning every uniform, every boot, every crease, every salute. Even in her calm, there was a magnetic force that commanded attention, forcing silence and respect simultaneously. For Jake Turner, watching his mother move through the room was like witnessing history in motion. Every medal, ribbon, and gold star glinted under the fluorescent lights, a symbol of achievement, perseverance, and undeniable authority. The cadets, previously dismissive and mocking, now moved with unspoken tension. The reality of her presence shifted the dynamic of the room instantly. Dylan and the others who had teased Jake weeks ago now offered anxious glances, unsure how to behave. Every joke, every sarcastic remark evaporated in the shadow of her authority. Harris, who had relished mocking Jake for weeks, now struggled to maintain his composure. His usual swagger was replaced with a quiet tension, his smirk gone. He shifted from foot to foot, caught between his own ego and the undeniable reality of Admiral Turner's presence. Admiral Turner paused near the front row, her eyes sweeping across the cadets. Her expression was neutral, but her presence alone was enough to silence every whisper. She spoke, her voice calm yet commanding. Discipline is not simply about posture or uniform alignment. It is about respect for oneself, for others, and for the institution you represent. Leadership is earned through action, not claimed through words. No one succeeds alone. Every order you give, every salute you receive, every movement you make has meaning. This is not a game. It is preparation for responsibility, integrity, and service. Her words hung in the air, every cadet absorbing them with varying degrees of awe and unease. Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest, a mixture of pride, validation, and relief. For weeks, he had endured ridicule and disbelief, but here, the truth of his mother's authority and accomplishments had become undeniable. Every lesson she had taught him, from patience to precision to quiet strength, resonated now, amplified by her presence. He could feel it, a quiet but powerful affirmation that he had endured correctly, that his discipline was recognized. Harris finally spoke, voice slightly shaky. "So, you're really his mother?" He avoided her gaze, aware that his mocking tone would no longer be tolerated. The room seemed to lean in, waiting for the Admiral's response. She regarded him calmly, her eyes steady. "Yes, Commander. I am his mother. And I am very real." Her gaze swept past him, finally resting briefly on Jake, offering a subtle nod. That single gesture was enough to signal recognition, validation, and pride. The room exhaled collectively, as if the tension had shifted in a single heartbeat. Admiral Turner moved down the line of cadets, inspecting each one with meticulous attention. She corrected minor flaws with brief, precise instructions, never harsh, but always commanding respect. Boots polished correctly, she noted to one cadet. Shoulders squared, posture aligned, she instructed another. The cadets, previously uncertain, now moved with renewed focus, inspired by her presence and careful guidance. It was clear that her words carried weight, not just because of rank, but because of experience, discipline, and respect earned over decades of service. When she reached Jake, her expression softened slightly. The classroom, already tense, seemed to hold its breath. She stood in front of him, her eyes meeting his. "Cadet Turner," she said quietly, her voice steady but warm. "Good work. You've maintained discipline, focus, and precision. You didn't need me to prove anything. You have demonstrated the qualities of a responsible cadet on your own." Her words struck deep, more meaningful than any reprimand or praise could have been. They acknowledged his endurance, his patience, and his integrity under relentless scrutiny. Jake's chest swelled with pride, and for a brief moment, the room seemed to disappear. He was no longer the boy ridiculed, mocked, or doubted. He was a cadet recognized for his own merit, his actions speaking louder than any rumor or disbelief. The weeks of teasing, the harsh sarcasm, and the unrelenting attention had culminated in this moment, a recognition of truth and personal achievement. His mother's presence had not only silenced the room, it had illuminated the values she had instilled in him: discipline, patience, and courage. The Admiral glanced at Harris, her gaze unwavering. Respect is earned through action, not authority alone. Cadets should understand that ridicule has no place where leadership and integrity are expected. Harris nodded subtly, acknowledging the truth in her words. The cadets, sensing the shift, began whispering among themselves, the earlier tension now replaced with awe and respect. Jake noticed their glances, some apologetic, others hesitant, all altered by the undeniable reality of Admiral Turner's presence. Admiral Turner continued moving through the room, offering brief but precise instructions. Cadets began to adjust their posture, align their boots, and execute salutes with renewed focus. The classroom energy shifted from nervous anticipation to disciplined execution. Every eye followed her, absorbing each correction, each word, each gesture. For Jake, this moment was both validation and inspiration. It was proof that his endurance, patience, and commitment had mattered. It was a living demonstration of the values his mother had always embodied and which he had now internalized. Finally, she stopped near the front row, turning to address the entire group. "Excellence is not just about skill or rank," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "It is about preparation, respect, integrity, and perseverance. Every cadet has the potential to achieve this, but only if they uphold these principles consistently. Leadership is a responsibility, not a privilege. Remember this: your actions, even in small ways, define who you are and how you are remembered." Her words lingered in the silence, creating an unspoken standard for every cadet in the room. For Jake, those words resonated deeply. The weeks of mockery and doubt had tested him, but he had stood firm. Every salute, every posture correction, every moment of restraint had prepared him for this day. And now, under the watchful eyes of his mother, he understood the true meaning of discipline and respect. He felt a quiet confidence settle over him, a recognition that he had endured correctly and with integrity. The inspection concluded with a quiet sense of awe. Cadets whispered amongst themselves, some exchanging glances of embarrassment for previous teasing, others reflecting on the powerful presence of Admiral Turner. Jake exhaled, a smile creeping across his face. He had not only survived weeks of ridicule, but had now been publicly validated. The truth of his mother's existence, her authority, and her values had become undeniable. As Admiral Turner prepared to leave, she paused at Jake once more. "I'm proud of you, Cadet Turner," she said softly, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "You have endured, you have maintained discipline, and you have demonstrated strength. Remember these lessons; they will serve you well in the classroom and beyond." Jake's chest swelled with pride, and he nodded, silently acknowledging the weight and meaning of her words. The cadets watched as she walked toward the door, her presence lingering in the room even as she left. Harris, still pale and subdued, could do little but acknowledge the undeniable impact she had on the classroom. Jake felt a quiet triumph, not from mocking others or proving himself verbally, but from the steady, unwavering recognition of his mother, a woman who embodied the discipline, courage, and integrity he had now internalized. The day concluded with a profound sense of accomplishment. Jake stood taller than ever, his uniform crisp, his posture precise, and his pride quietly glowing. The ridicule that had once defined him was gone, replaced by respect and the validation of his own perseverance. The lessons he had internalized from his mother, combined with his own endurance, had culminated in this moment of undeniable truth. He had stood firm, and the world, at least this classroom, had finally acknowledged it. Jake took one final deep breath, glancing at the empty doorway where his mother had exited. He whispered to himself, as he had so many times in the past week, "Strength isn't in proving others wrong. It's in standing tall, knowing who you are. And today, I have done both." The classroom remained unusually quiet after Admiral Turner left. A lingering sense of awe hung in the air, like a weight pressing down on every cadet, commanding both attention and reflection. Even Harris, the man who had ridiculed Jake for weeks, was subdued, his usual swagger replaced by hesitant self-awareness. For the cadets, the reality of Admiral Turner's presence and the undeniable truth of Jake's claim was impossible to ignore. The boy who had endured weeks of mockery now stood tall, unshaken, validated by the living embodiment of his story. Jake exhaled slowly, finally allowing himself a moment of relief. Weeks of whispered jokes, sarcastic remarks, and pointed glances had culminated in this moment of undeniable recognition. His mother's presence had not only silenced the room, but had illustrated a profound lesson. Authority and respect are not demanded, they are earned. Every cadet present had witnessed it, and Jake could feel their perception of him shifting in real time. What had once been a source of humiliation had transformed into a quiet, unshakable pride. As he adjusted his uniform and ran a hand over the polished boots he had meticulously cleaned the night before, Jake felt the weight of the past weeks lift from his shoulders. He had endured the mockery without faltering. He had maintained discipline under scrutiny. And most importantly, he had proven to himself that patience, focus, and quiet resilience could withstand even the harshest ridicule. His mother's brief nod of approval and her quiet praise had become the ultimate validation, a shield against every sarcastic remark or doubt that had haunted him. The cadets, previously emboldened by their mockery, now moved with a newfound reverence. Dylan, who had been particularly relentless in his teasing, avoided Jake's gaze, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. He seemed unsure how to respond, as if the weight of truth had left him unharmed. Murmurs spread across the room, so he wasn't lying. She's real. These whispers, once used to ridicule, now carried hints of awe and apology. Even Harris, normally so confident, appeared diminished, aware that his arrogance had been publicly deflated. The classroom's energy slowly began to shift, the tension evolving from disbelief to a collective acknowledgement of discipline, truth, and earned respect. Jake noticed cadets adjusting their posture, attempting to mirror the precision that Admiral Turner had exemplified. Some glanced at him with tentative admiration, others with muted embarrassment for having doubted him. For Jake, the transformation in the room was subtle but unmistakable. His endurance, patience, and composure had not only proven his claim, but had also inspired a newfound awareness of the standards his mother embodied. Jake's thoughts drifted back to the lessons his mother had instilled in him long before this moment. He remembered standing on the deck of her ship as a child, watching sailors move with perfect synchronicity under her command. He remembered the quiet authority she wielded, commanding fleets without raising her voice unnecessarily, earning respect through action and integrity rather than intimidation. These memories, vivid and grounding, had become his armor during weeks of ridicule. Every movement, every salute, every measured response had been informed by her example, culminating now in a day that proved their value. Harris, slowly regaining some composure, cleared his throat. "Cadets," he began, voice still hesitant, "today has been enlightening. I underestimated certain aspects of discipline and leadership. Cadet Turner, I acknowledge your perseverance and your performance under scrutiny." The words were halting, awkward, but they carried the weight of admission. It was a rare moment of humility from a man accustomed to authority, and the cadets listened intently, absorbing the subtle lesson that even those in power could recognize truth and integrity when confronted with undeniable evidence. Jake allowed himself a small, private smile. He had endured weeks of doubt and ridicule, and now, through composure and discipline, he had not only survived, but had been publicly validated. Yet, beyond personal triumph, he felt a deeper satisfaction. His mother's presence had conveyed a lesson far greater than mere vindication. It was a demonstration of values, discipline, integrity, patience, and quiet strength that could not be challenged, diminished, or mocked. These were lessons that transcended ridicule and would remain with him long after the classroom emptied. The cadets, gradually settling into their post-inspection routines, moved with a mixture of respect and uncertainty. Some approached Jake, offering hesitant congratulations, their tone a mixture of apology and acknowledgement. Others whispered to one another, revisiting prior assumptions and reevaluating their behavior. For the first time, Jake understood the quiet power of truth, reinforced by action and presence. Words alone could not convey the depth of authority and integrity, but the living proof standing before them, the Admiral and by extension, Jake's own composure, had spoken volumes. Jake's mind wandered to the private conversations he had shared with his mother in past weeks, recalling her guidance and wisdom. Strength is not proven through confrontation. It is demonstrated through patience, perseverance, and integrity. These words had anchored him through ridicule, and now, under the observation of peers and authority figures, they had borne fruit. Every mockery, every sarcastic comment, every glance of disbelief had been transformed into a lesson in resilience and quiet confidence. By late afternoon, the inspection concluded formally, though the echoes of its impact lingered. The classroom atmosphere remained charged, but with a new tone, one of respect, reflection, and subtle acknowledgement. Jake felt a calm satisfaction, a deep understanding that he had endured not only for personal vindication, but also to uphold principles instilled in him long before ridicule had begun. He realized that leadership and discipline were not simply measured in public moments of approval, but in the steady, deliberate actions that defined character over time. Harris, finally regaining some composure, approached Jake. "Cadet Turner," he said quietly, voice subdued, "I underestimated you. Your performance today, it speaks volumes." Jake simply nodded, offering no words of triumph, no gloating. Victory was quiet, measured, and grounded in the lessons he had internalized from his mother. Words were unnecessary. His composure, his discipline, and the undeniable presence of his mother had conveyed the message far more powerfully than any argument could. The classroom emptied gradually, cadets filing out with whispers of awe and tentative admiration. Jake remained at attention briefly, straightening his uniform, his chest swelling with pride. He reflected on the weeks of mockery, the relentless teasing, and the moments of doubt. Now, under the undeniable proof of Admiral Turner's presence, every insult, every sarcastic remark, every whispered joke had been rendered irrelevant. His endurance had been rewarded, not through confrontation, but through quiet, steady demonstration of discipline and character. Finally, alone for a moment, Jake allowed himself to relax. The tightness in his chest eased, replaced with a profound sense of accomplishment. He thought of his mother, the living embodiment of the lessons he had been taught, and felt gratitude for the guidance and example she had provided. Today had not just validated a claim, it had affirmed values, discipline, and integrity, showing him that patience, perseverance, and quiet strength could withstand even relentless ridicule. Jake took a deep breath, straightened his uniform one last time, and whispered to himself, "Strength isn't in proving others wrong. It's in standing tall, knowing who you are. Today, I have done both, and tomorrow, I carry these lessons forward." The weeks of ridicule, the constant doubt, and the relentless teasing had forged him into a cadet of patience, precision, and resilience. And for the first time in weeks, he felt truly at peace, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The day after Admiral Turner's visit dawned bright and crisp, the Norfolk sunlight streaming through the classroom windows and highlighting every polished surface, every crease in the cadets' uniforms. The atmosphere felt different, charged with quiet reverence and subtle tension. Even the whispers that had previously fueled mockery were now tinged with awe and respect. Jake Turner walked into the room with a steady gait, his posture impeccable, boots clicking sharply against the floor. He had changed. Not only had he survived weeks of ridicule, but he had emerged with a confidence that radiated from him quietly, undeniably. As he took his place in formation, the cadets' eyes followed him. Some looked at him with newfound respect, others with hesitant admiration, and a few with lingering embarrassment over their prior behavior. Dylan, who had relentlessly teased him for weeks, avoided eye contact entirely, shifting uneasily from foot to foot. The other cadets whispered among themselves, some murmuring apologies, others just commenting on the obvious transformation in Jake, even Commander Harris. Once the source of relentless mockery approached him hesitantly. "Cadet Turner," Harris said quietly, voice lacking its usual arrogance, "I wanted to acknowledge your performance yesterday. You demonstrated patience, discipline, and composure that are rare, even among seasoned cadets. I underestimated you." The words were halting, awkward, yet sincere. For Harris, admitting fault was an enormous concession, and Jake recognized the weight of this acknowledgement. He nodded respectfully, his jaw tight but calm, offering no gloating or satisfaction. The moment was about validation, not revenge. The morning passed with a strange combination of routine and reflection. The cadets moved through drills with precision, aware of the lingering presence of Admiral Turner in their minds, even though she was no longer physically in the room. Jake noticed that cadets who had mocked him were now adjusting their movements, aligning their salutes more carefully, straightening their postures. The room had shifted subtly, quietly. Mockery had been replaced by aspiration. His mother's visit had left a ripple effect that extended beyond the moment, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. During a brief break, Dylan approached Jake tentatively, his expression uncertain. "Hey, Turner," he said, voice low. Sorry about, all the stuff I said. I didn't believe you, and, well, I was wrong." The words, halting and awkward, were unlike the boy who had once mocked him so relentlessly. Jake felt a mixture of surprise and quiet satisfaction. This wasn't just an apology. It was a recognition of truth and respect earned through patience and endurance. "It's okay," Jake replied simply, voice steady. "You'll understand better with time. Just focus on doing your best." Dylan nodded, humbled, and stepped back, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. The day progressed with subtle shifts in dynamics. Cadets moved with heightened awareness, conscious of every detail in their form, posture, and execution. Harris observed quietly, no longer attempting to mock or belittle. There was a new respect in his stance, a recognition of the undeniable reality of both Admiral Turner and her son's integrity. Jake felt the weight of weeks of ridicule dissipate slowly, replaced by a quiet assurance that had been forged through patience, endurance, and unwavering discipline. During lunch, Jake sat in a quiet corner, sketchbook open. He traced the lines of ships and ship's decks he had drawn before, each stroke meditative, grounding him in the lessons he had internalized. He reflected on Admiral Turner's visit and the shift it had caused. The mockery, sarcasm, and disbelief that had haunted him were gone, replaced by subtle admiration and newfound awareness among his peers. It was a validation not only of his claim, but of the values that had guided him: discipline, patience, integrity, and courage. By mid-afternoon, Jake noticed subtle changes in classroom behavior. Cadets moved with more precision, their salutes sharper, posture straighter, and eyes attentive. It was clear that Admiral Turner's presence had set a standard that would linger. Her authority had transcended the physical visit, becoming an intangible force that guided actions and inspired respect. Jake realized that he had not only endured ridicule, but had catalyzed a subtle but profound change in his peers. The lessons of discipline and integrity were now spreading, quietly reshaping behavior. Harris, now more subdued than ever, addressed the cadets. Yesterday's inspection demonstrated a lot about discipline, focus, and integrity, he said, voice lacking its previous arrogance. It was a lesson not just in procedure, but in respect, patience, and perseverance. Cadet Turner, your performance was exemplary. I acknowledge that fully. The words carried weight. For weeks, Harris had been a source of relentless mockery, yet now he publicly recognized Jake's achievements, affirming the lessons he had endured. Later in the day, Jake was approached by several cadets seeking guidance. They asked him to demonstrate proper posture, salutes, and drill techniques. The irony was not lost on him. Those who had once mocked him now looked to him for mentorship. Jake taught quietly and patiently, emphasizing discipline, integrity, and composure over arrogance or superiority. Each correction was calm, deliberate, and respectful. The boys and girls absorbing his instructions were learning more than drill. They were learning resilience, humility, and the quiet power of enduring ridicule with dignity. By the end of the day, the classroom had transformed. The previous hierarchy of mockery and doubt had been replaced with respect, not just for Jake, but for the principles he had embodied and the lessons he had demonstrated. Even Harris moved differently, more measured, no longer relying on sarcasm or intimidation. Jake realized that enduring ridicule and proving oneself through patience and discipline could reshape not only perception but behavior, creating subtle ripples that extended far beyond the initial moment of confrontation. As the bell rang to signal the end of the day, Jake straightened his uniform one last time. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment and calm, knowing that the past weeks of mockery had not broken him. Instead, they had forged him into a cadet who understood the deeper meaning of discipline, respect, and resilience. He had endured ridicule, maintained composure, and emerged with validation not only from his mother, but from the subtle acknowledgement of his peers and even his former tormentor, Harris. Walking out of the classroom, Jake reflected on the journey he had undergone. Every mocking glance, sarcastic remark, and whispered joke had tested his patience and resilience. Every moment of endurance had been a quiet affirmation of his own strength and integrity. And through it all, Admiral Turner's presence had been the ultimate validation, not just of his claim, but of the values she had instilled in him, and that he had now embodied fully. As he stepped into the bright Norfolk afternoon, Jake felt a lightness in his step. The classroom, the teasing, and the ridicule no longer held power over him. He had endured, proven himself, and demonstrated that discipline, patience, and integrity could withstand even relentless mockery. And though the journey was far from over, he now carried the quiet confidence that comes from knowing one has faced doubt and emerged stronger, validated, and ready to lead. The days that followed Admiral Turner's visit carried a sense of quiet transformation. The classroom, once filled with whispers of mockery and doubt, now resonated with subtle respect and renewed focus. Cadets moved with intention, their posture straighter, their salutes crisper, and their attention sharper. Jake Turner walked among them with a calm confidence, not the arrogance of superiority, but the quiet authority earned through perseverance, patience, and resilience. He had been tested, mocked, and doubted, and now he carried proof that truth, integrity, and discipline could withstand ridicule and emerge stronger. Even Commander Harris, who had once been relentless in his sarcasm, had shifted. The mocking glances and cutting remarks were gone, replaced by cautious acknowledgement. Harris watched Jake with a mixture of residual disbelief and respect, as if silently recording a lesson he could not unsee. "Cadet Turner," he muttered one morning, "your focus and composure have set a new standard for this program." The words were clipped, awkward, but sincere. For Harris, admitting the merit of someone he had tormented was a lesson in humility, one he could neither ignore nor diminish. Jake had learned to move through the classroom with purpose. His every action, from straightening a uniform to demonstrating proper posture, was a reflection of the lessons instilled in him by his mother and reinforced through endurance. The cadets who had mocked him now approached him for guidance, eager to understand the precision, discipline, and composure that had allowed him to endure weeks of ridicule without faltering. Even Dylan, once his harshest tormentor, now listened quietly, taking notes and mimicking Jake's measured movements during drills. At lunch, Jake found himself surrounded by cadets seeking advice. "How did you stay calm?" one asked quietly, not wanting to draw attention from the others. "How did you handle the teasing?" Jake thought for a moment, reflecting on the lessons Admiral Turner had embodied and the guidance she had shared with him since childhood. "Discipline isn't just about posture or precision," he said softly. "It's about patience, integrity, and focus. People will doubt you, mock you, even try to break you, but staying true to your values is stronger than any insult." The group absorbed his words with quiet reverence. Jake's own experience had become a living lesson, demonstrating that endurance and composure could transform perception and earn respect. Even the cadets who had once participated in the teasing now nodded, the realization sinking in that mockery could never overpower discipline, focus, and integrity. His patience, demonstrated over weeks, had created a ripple effect. One boy's perseverance now influenced the behavior and attitude of the entire group. As the week progressed, Jake's confidence grew steadily. He moved with an unshakable calm, his eyes alert, his actions precise, embodying the principles Admiral Turner had taught him in both word and example. The classroom, once a place of ridicule, had become a training ground for quiet respect and subtle transformation. Even Harris, though still commanding in presence, now measured his tone and critiques carefully, aware that the dynamic had shifted and that Jake's composure and resilience could no longer be dismissed. One afternoon, during an advanced drill session, Jake noticed Dylan struggling with a particularly difficult maneuver. Rather than mocking him as he once had, Jake stepped beside him, demonstrating the steps patiently. "Keep your shoulders aligned, eyes forward, and don't rush the motion," he instructed calmly. Dylan followed, slowly mastering the movement. The room watched quietly, sensing the shift from derision to mentorship. Jake's example had become a model for leadership, not through intimidation, but through quiet guidance, discipline, and respect. By the end of the week, the classroom had fully transformed. The teasing was gone, replaced by attentive practice and focused effort. Cadets moved with intention, learning from both the lessons imparted by Jake and the enduring example of Admiral Turner. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable. Ridicule had been replaced by aspiration, doubt replaced by respect, and mockery replaced by humility. Jake had emerged as a leader, not because of rank, but because of the perseverance, patience, and integrity he had demonstrated under relentless pressure. Jake took a quiet moment for reflection at the end of the week. He thought of Admiral Turner, her presence, and the lessons she had embodied. He realized that her visit had not just proven her existence, or validated his claims, it had reinforced a lifelong lesson. True authority and respect are earned through action. Integrity and composure, not through words or intimidation. He now understood fully that the ability to endure ridicule and remain true to one's values was one of the strongest forms of leadership. Later that day, as cadets filed out of the classroom, Dylan approached Jake once more, this time with a quieter, more sincere expression. "Thanks," he said simply, "for helping me, for showing me how to handle things. I get it now." Jake nodded, a small knowing smile crossing his face. It was a moment of reconciliation, a subtle acknowledgement that even those who had doubted him could now learn from his endurance. The past weeks of ridicule had become a teaching moment, and the lesson extended far beyond mere drills or inspections. By the following week, the transformation was complete. Cadets moved with precision, respect, and focus. The dynamic between Jake and Harris had changed subtly, but permanently. Mockery was gone, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of merit. And Jake himself had changed. He no longer carried the tight anxiety or self-consciousness that had marked his first weeks of ridicule. Instead, he carried a steady, unshakable confidence, grounded in discipline, integrity, and the enduring validation of Admiral Turner. In the quiet moments after class, Jake often reflected on the journey he had undergone. Weeks of teasing, ridicule, and disbelief had tested him relentlessly, but he had endured, maintained composure, and emerged stronger. The lessons he had internalized were now living parts of him: patience, discipline, integrity, and courage. And he had learned that enduring mockery was not a weakness, but an opportunity to demonstrate character and earn respect. One afternoon, as he was leaving the classroom, he saw Harris standing in the doorway. "Cadet Turner," the commander said quietly, "I wanted to acknowledge one last time your composure, your patience, and your dedication. It has been enlightening. You've set a standard I cannot ignore." Jake nodded respectfully, offering no boast or prideful words. The acknowledgement was enough. His journey had not been about revenge or proving others wrong. It had been about standing tall, knowing who he was, and embodying the values instilled by his mother. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a golden glow across the classroom, Jake walked down the hall with a quiet confidence. The weeks of ridicule were now a distant memory, replaced by the knowledge that he had endured, proven himself, and transformed both his own character and the environment around him. Admiral Turner's presence had been the catalyst, but his own discipline and patience had sustained him, allowing him to emerge, not only vindicated, but stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. At home that evening, he called his mother on the phone. "Thanks," he said quietly, pride and gratitude in his voice. "For everything. For showing up, for teaching me, for trusting me to endure." On the other end, Admiral Turner's voice was calm, warm, and steady. "You did it, Jake. You endured. You maintained discipline, and you demonstrated integrity. I'm proud of you. Remember, true strength comes from standing firm, even when no one believes in you." Jake smiled, absorbing her words, understanding fully that this lesson would stay with him for the rest of his life. As he hung up the phone and looked out the window at the setting sun, Jake Turner felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced ridicule, disbelief, and relentless mockery, and had emerged stronger, validated, and transformed. He had proven not only to his classmates, his commander, and his mother, but also to himself, that endurance, discipline, and integrity were the true measures of strength. And with that realization, he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, confident, steady, and unshakable.